Welcome back to the Resilient Philosopher. Today, I want to take you into the heartbeat of something most leadership conversations avoid, something that leaders are often afraid to talk about, something we hide behind our titles, our responsibilities, our routines, our masks, and that's mental health. We don't talk about it because it feels vulnerable. We don't talk about it because it feels like a betrayal of strength. We don't talk about it because leaders are expected to be unbreakable, even when they are breaking. But leadership doesn't begin at a conference table. It doesn't begin in strategy meetings or boardrooms. It begins in the mind. It begins where your fears live, where your doubts whisper, where your emotional storms rise and fall. It begins at the edge of your mental health. In the book, Leadership Lessons from the Edge of Mental Health, I wrote that leadership doesn't begin with a title. It begins the moment you choose to master yourself. And today, we're going to explore that mastery. Not perfection, not confidence, not the facade of strength, but mastery. Because you can lead others if you abandon yourself. Because you can't empower others if you silence your own voice. And you can't create resilient teams if you don't build a resilient mind. Today's episode explores why mental health is not an impediment to leadership, why your struggles do not disqualify you, why the edge of your own mind might be the most powerful leadership classroom you will ever enter. So sit back, take a breath, and let's begin. Let me start with a simple truth. A leader's mind becomes the emotional climate of the people they lead. If your mind is chaotic, your decisions become chaotic. If your mind is numb, your people become disconnected. If your mind is anxious, uncertainty spreads like wildfire. But if your mind is grounded, if your mind is self-aware, if your mind understands itself, then you become the anchor others hold onto. And when everything else is falling apart. That is why mental health matters in leadership. Not because leaders are fragile, but because leaders are human. In the book, I describe how emotional intelligence becomes the hidden superpower of leadership. On page 22, I wrote, leaders with high emotional intelligence do not react, they respond. They do not dominate, they inspire. And this is where mental health becomes essential. You cannot control your emotional world if you do not understand it. You cannot understand it if you never face it. You cannot face it if your only goal is to appear strong instead of actually being resilient. Mental health is not a trend. It is a buzzword. It is a foundation of leadership. Every reaction, every decision, every conflict, every emotional, motivational moment all begins inside your mind. If your mind is overwhelmed or untreated, your leadership becomes reactive. If your mind is ignored or suppressed, your leadership becomes deserted. But if your mind is supported, understood, strengthened, everything changes. This is why I tell leaders mental health is leadership health. You cannot separate them. You cannot pretend one thrives while the other decays. And you cannot lead effectively without knowing the landscapes of your own internal world. Let's dismantle one of the most dangerous myths in leadership. The myth that leaders must be unbreakable. The truth? Leaders break all the time. They just learn how to rebuild. On pages 26 through 30 of the book, I describe the invisible battles that leaders carry: anxiety, depression, burnout, ADHD, imposter syndrome, bipolar imbalance, trauma, grief, and the pressure of responsibility that never sleeps. These are not weaknesses. These are realities. Some of the greatest leaders in history led from a place of deep personal struggle because their suffering sharpened their empathy. Their pain strengthened their purpose. Their vulnerability made them human. Leadership collapses not because a leader struggles, but because they pretend they don't. When you deny your mental health, you deny your humanity. When you deny your humanity, you deny your ability to connect with others. And when connection dies, leadership dies with it. Mental health issues do not disqualify leaders. They refine leaders. They humanize leaders. They deepen leaders. I often say, a leader who has never confronted themselves cannot truly guide others. When you stand on the edge of your own mind, when you feel fear, darkness, exhaustion, or emotional storms, and yet you continue, you learn something no leadership book can teach you. You learn authenticity. You learn compassion. You learn the power of silence. You learn the value of presence. And you learn that leadership is not about barking orders. Leadership is about carrying light through darkness. One of the most powerful lines in the book is on page 32. Breakdown is not a failure. It is the striping away of noise. Let's stay with that. Most people fear breaking down. But what if that moment is not the end, but the beginning? Breaking down is the moment life stops negotiating with your avoidance. It is the moment truth becomes louder than excuses. It is the moment your soul pulls aside and says, you cannot lead others until you lead yourself back home. Breakdown reveals what you value, what you've neglected, what you ignore, what you've suppressed, what you truly want to become. The world teaches leaders to hide their fractures, but the Resilient Philosopher teaches the opposite. Your fractures are where the light enters your leadership. Your fractures are where your philosophy takes shape. Your fractures are where resilience is born. A leader built only from success is shallow. A leader that is built from suffering is unshakable. Now let's talk about the recovery discipline. Mental, mental resilience is not a talent. It is a discipline. It's a practice, a daily commitment. On pages 30 to 42, I break down several practices that help leaders stay emotionally grounded and mentally sharp. Journaling to name your fears and triggers. Emotional labeling to weaken the grip of overwhelming feelings. Rest and sleep as strategy tools, not luxuries. Pausing under pressure instead of reacting impulsively. Building safe emotional spaces where you can collapse without being judged. And setting boundaries that protect your peace and focus. These practices are not about eliminating your mental health struggles. They are about navigating them with intelligence, intention, and compassion. Leadership is not the absence of stress. Leadership is clarity inside stress. Leadership is the ability to breathe when others are panicking. Leadership is presence. A leader who knows their limits is stronger than a leader who pretends not to have any. Let's confront the central message of this episode. Mental health issues do not disqualify you from being a leader. They never have. They never will. Your anxiety doesn't disqualify you. Your depression doesn't disqualify you. Your trauma does not disqualify you. Your PTSD, bipolar disorder, ADHD, emotional sensitivity, none of this disqualifies you. What disqualifies you as a leader is denial. What destroys leadership is avoidance. What corrupts leadership is ego. The Resilient Philosopher sees mental health not as an obstacle, but as a teacher. Your emotional storms teach humility. Your internal struggles teach presence. Your healing journey teaches serving leadership. Your self-awareness teaches responsibility. Look at the leaders who crumble in public. They crumble because they never confronted their private storms. But leaders who confront their storms early, leaders who seek therapy, support, recovery, spiritual grounding, leaders who embrace their humanity, those are leaders who last. Those are leaders who inspire. Those are leaders people trust. Because people don't need perfect leaders. They need present leaders. Near the end of the book, in the chapter of Serving Leadership, pages 63 to 78, I wrote the highest purpose of leadership is not to shine at the center, but to lift others so high that they shine without you. See, mental health struggles shape leadership in three ways. First, humility. When you struggle, you no longer lead from ego. Second, empathy. When you've known pain, you recognize it in others quietly. And third, responsibility. When you've rebuilt yourself, you understand the responsibility of uplifting others who cannot yet rebuild. So serving leadership requires a resilient mind. Not a perfect mind, a resilient mind. A mind that has survived storms and still chooses to serve. Let me leave you with this. If you feel like you are standing at the edge of your mental health, you're not failing, you're awakening. If you feel overwhelmed, you're not collapsing, You are learning what needs to be healed. If you think your mental health disqualifies you, it is the opposite. Your struggle is shaping the leader that you're becoming. Your healing is shaping the leader others need. Your resilience is shaping the philosophy you will one day teach. Leadership does not require perfection. It requires presence. It requires clarity. It requires humanity. And in your mental health is not a barrier to leadership. It is the birthplace of leadership. Thank you for listening. Thank you for growing. And thank you for becoming. This is the Resilient Philosopher reminding you that every edge you face becomes a path for someone else to follow. And this is why you must always show up for yourself.